Alright, this is your typical I'm sick and you might notice in the recording of this video message for the start of it. Alright, here we go. Volume 5 time. What wacky shenanigans are we gonna talk about in this one? Let's just fucking start. I sometimes forget how well made Ed, Edd and Eddy was. Slapstick isn't my favorite style of humor, even though I have a lot of appreciation for it. The Three Stooges was a show that I was able to watch and bond with my father over. I loved Tom and Jerry and Looney Tunes as a kid, but it's not something I revisit that often because normally I want a little bit more out of comedy, but I can't deny how well done it is in Ed, Edd and Eddy. It kind of marked the end of an era, being one of the last shows to ever use traditional frame-by-frame animation, and my god, it looked fantastic. The timing was always great, the sound editing was always great. You always felt the weight of every over-the-top way they hurt these characters, but they always had a silly enough reaction or quick enough recovery to where you didn't feel too bad at the sight of watching a bunch of children get hurt. It knew exactly what it needed to be, and it excelled at it for many years. One thing that made me appreciate the slapstick comedy over other slapstick comedies was definitely the characters. My favorite episode of the show is the Valentine's Day special. And while it certainly had a lot of slapstick, my favorite moments always came from these small interactions with the characters. Like Johnny screaming that he couldn't let one of the Canker sisters read a letter he was going to deliver because it was against squirrel policy, or the part where Kevin gives Ed a detention and he just gives the biggest and dumbest smile. All of these characters are very funny and memorable. The movie is more of that, with some good closure for the characters. Specifically with Eddy, with his redemption and the reveal of his older brother. There are a ton of callbacks to old episodes thrown in, some so quickly that you can miss them in the blink of an eye. The movie never feels like it's slowing itself down or being obnoxious with callbacks. They match the pace of everything else going on in this movie, and it's a very welcomed addition. The film is a great adaptation of the show, allowing every single main character to have their own little shared arc. The three Eds, Rolf and Wilfred, Kevin and Naz, Jimmy and Sarah, Johnny and Plank, and even the three Canker sisters slowly merge in all these different stories together with their excessive kidnapping throughout the movie. The opening scene does a great job painting a picture of a more grand story. We've seen the kids in the cul-de-sac get angry or abusive towards the Ed boys many times, but this time it was more eerie, with the first minute or two of this movie being in pure silence. We then see each of the three Eds handling the consequences of what they've done in their own way. Ed is panicking and trying to pack his entire room with him, Double D is writing a letter to his parents expressing the deep shame he is feeling, and Eddy is just trying to figure their escape out. But all three of them are probably more freaked out than we've ever seen them on the show. As for the other kids at the cul-de-sac, they're angry. More angry than usual, and oh my god, look at them. This show and its fucking details, they are disfigured. This all leads into a big grand chase scene, and once the Eds finally escape and are on their own to start their journey, we are now 20 minutes in. Nearly the length of 2 whole episodes is spent hammering in just how badly they fucked up this time, and it does a lot for the rest of the movie. It is a made-for-TV movie, so the animation does look like the show's animation, but it's another case where I think it was for the best. Ed, Edd and Eddy had a very specific style to it, and I'm not sure if adding in more in-between frames or a theatrical shade-in would have really done it any favors. It actually could have done more harm than good, but it does a few things to separate itself from the show that work in my opinion. For starters, the angles that we get in this film are fantastic. There's a lot of fighting and chasing in this movie, and they have a lot of fun with the 3D environments and unique angles to match the bigger story they're trying to tell with this one. There's some set pieces in this movie that really threw me off. Seeing Johnny on a bus full of a bunch of adults was wild to see, even if we never do see their faces. That shot of it driving on the highway made this world feel more alive than the show ever did. The famous purgatory theory was always an interesting one to me. Not because I thought the theory was true, but more so it was a fun observation. These kids do really feel like they're in their own world, and they never have that much interaction with the world outside of their neighborhood. Them going to school was probably the most they ever branched out, and even then, we never saw any teachers or other students. Even when they wanted to do something in the gym, they had Kevin take over as the gym teacher. The film has 2 scenes that adds a lot more depth to both Eddy and Double D, but they always get the tone right and not make it come off as melodramatic or out of place for the series. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of sappy shit, but I do think there's a time and place for it, and Ed, Edd and Eddy normally isn't going to be the time or place for it. The first scene is when Eddy and Ed fake their death as a prank. These two have been dicking around the entire movie, and Double D starts to get frustrated, as he's the only one who's really been working towards a solution to a problem that realistically Eddy is the most responsible for out of the trio. This prank gone too far sends Double D over the edge, leaving Eddy and Ed behind. Eddy starts tearing up before exploding and admitting the entire thing was his fault. I do like this scene a lot. I think it's a pretty nice moment for these characters to share, as it really felt like it was a long time coming. But they had to be careful because the show is a comedy and not really anything else. Some cartoons are able to be funny and sentimental, but the show never really did this without there being a punchline at the end. Even in the Christmas special where it feels like we're finally going to get this wholesome ending from Eddy, he immediately fucks it up. But I think there's two reasons this scene works really well here. One, it's a finale movie. I understand with higher stakes you want bigger reactions. A little bit of escalation is normally necessary to make a movie work. Two, the editing decisions really help it feel at home with the show. They aren't playing with this sad and dramatic music, it's more of the show's regular score. It honestly fits pretty well considering the characters we are dealing with. On top of that, Ed is still providing comedy with his monologue and about their trio meeting its end. Without these choices, I think the scene could have been laughable for the wrong reasons, but no, they made it feel at home, and therefore not only does it not get in the way of the show's tone, but it successfully gets a serious reaction from me. Because it is a more serious moment, but it's not doing weird shit to take me out of it. I think the scene manages to make their bond stronger, and it leads into a scene I find especially charming with Ed carrying Eddy and Double D, and them using fireflies as a light to continue their journey through the night. This visual left an impact on me. It's the part that I'm always reminded of when I think about this movie. It is honestly nice to see their camaraderie in these final scenes of the film. The second scene is obviously Eddy's brother. These last 5 minutes of the show redefine Eddy's character, as well as the other kids in the cul-de-sac. We learn that Eddy's brother, who he's been hyping up since the very start of the show, is a huge prick who's been harming and abusing Eddy intentionally. You can at least say Eddy's scams going as poorly as they do isn't intentional, and at the end of the day, he is just a kid. He is someone with the ability to grow and do better. The other kids seeing this stick up for Eddy, Eddy confesses his lies to Double D about his brother, resulting in a moment that is very sappy, but fuck it, they earned it.
When am I gonna learn, Double D?
I think you just have, Eddy.
I'd love to go on about this movie even more, but I think I'm going to let someone else speak on that for a bit. But this was truly an amazing film adaptation of the show. I don't think a better version of an ending to the show or movie could exist. It's perfect.
Ed, do you have a quarter?
I do not have a quarter for you, Eddy. I am sorry. Do you have a quarter, Eddy?
Hey, this is Stuart. When it came to cartoons, my early childhood consisted mainly of Ed, Edd n Eddy and SpongeBob. I remember claiming that both were hands down my favorite pieces of media. That still remains true for early SpongeBob, seasons 1 through 3, the first movie, and a bit of season 4. But for Ed, Edd n Eddy, it's been a while since I've watched an episode. So when Michael asked me if I wanted to watch the Big Picture show for his video, I thought it would be a great opportunity to revisit a part of my childhood. I remember the episode A Fistful of Ed was promoted on Cartoon Network as the final episode. It ended with Eddy standing up for Double D against the Canker sisters, followed by all three of them eating hot dogs. I thought it was alright, but of course I wanted more. I never watched the movie on TV, more so on YouTube over a decade ago. I think it might have released in Canada first, I'm not entirely sure. And now I'm watching it again through other means, because for some reason Warner Brothers hates everything it owns. I'd say this movie focuses on giving Eddy a hero's journey. While it was never necessary to explore this side of him, I do find it interesting that they decide to. In past episodes, Eddy used the idea of his brother as a get-out-of-jail-free card to the cul-de-sac members, giving nothing but praise about him while the kids are terrified. You could see subtle foreshadowing of the relationship between the brothers in the opening. For example, Eddy placing messy wallpaper on his brother's door could mean that Eddy wasn't truthful about how his brother is as a person, and that the facade will slowly be lifted as the movie goes on. This could explain why the windows and vents are bricked off. Eddy never wanted to tell anyone the truth about his abuse from his brother.
So, bro, as you can see, I'm a big shot now. No more beating up little Eddy. Hey, big brother?
Even the key in the peanut is a false sense of hope. If it wasn't for Ed, their fates would have been sealed right there.
I am Ed! Cheese and macaroni!
The call to adventure being the Eds fleeing the cul-de-sac in hopes of meeting Eddy's brother, so that he can protect them from the rest of the kids. Eddy's attitude from the beginning to now becomes a 180, as he thinks all of his issues will easily be solved by Double D, who's the only one taking this serious. You could consider him as Eddy's mentor and helper. Confronting Eddy on his actions and getting him to open up and finally admit, for once, that he messed up. In tears while hitting himself could be a result of childhood trauma, either from his brother's abuse, the kids, or maybe a parent. While Double D was serious, he figured the only way to possibly cheer him up is with a prank they did to him earlier in the film.
Your shirt, Eddie.
My shirt?
Are those salt deposits from your lamentation?
The truth being revealed at the end of the movie, where we see firsthand how Eddie's relationship with his brother really is. Everyone present is in shock. Once Ed pulls a pro-gamer move and gives Eddie's brother a concussion, is when the old Eddie is gone and a new one is reborn. With the encouragement of Double D, Eddie changes for the better. He even apologizes to the kids. Perhaps seeing Eddie getting beaten up was his atonement for what he's done, and they now see him for who he really is. He just wanted friends, but didn't know how to express that honestly. So he stooped to his brother's level, one of the only role models he's had growing up, and thought this was the only way. Johnny and Plank coming in at the end, oblivious to what has happened, could have also shown the kids how wrong they've treated the Eds. Beating up Johnny and Plank shows that the kids have also changed for the better. I may be thinking too much over a kid's cartoon, but it's a show I've grown up with and it means a lot to me. So rewatching this with Michael, it's made me think more about why I love this show. I personally think this is a good way to end the series. A bit of character growth for everybody, except for Johnny, who becomes a supervillain at the post-credits scene. But I wonder how Eddie's brother ended up the way that he did. If only there was a spin-off series, set in the past, possibly before Eddie was born, moving into the cul-de-sac and showing just how much of a POS he truly is.
Dear, are you in there?
What do you want, Ma?
Son, we're moving out of the trailer park.
What?
Just a little further, fellas.
I think they'll be mad when they realize we took it.
Don't worry, she's all ours now.
Wasn't Phineas and Ferb funny? I remember when the show was first airing on Disney, my brother was completely phased out of watching cartoons, and I was really only watching adult cartoons like The Simpsons or South Park. But both of us could agree that Phineas and Ferb was an exception. It was a legitimately funny show with a great formula. Every character was memorable, the songs were incredibly catchy, and there was just something about the jokes that really sold me. It was a show that could both have a really loud and extreme reaction from one of the characters and a really dry and casual reaction, and both would get a laugh. There was never any overarching stories, but it did have a sense of continuity, which led to some good jokes.
What if a satellite falls out of orbit and crashes into the house?
If that happens, you're in charge.
Phineas, you know I'm in charge, right?
Well, isn't that just if a satellite crashes into the...
No.
When the Phineas and Ferb movie got announced, I was really hyped for it. The funny thing about the show is it had the perfect setup for a movie. Like, it's actually amazing how well they set themselves up for a film. The show is essentially two different shows that always come together by the end of it. So to make a movie work, literally all you have to do is bring those two shows together quicker, and boom, perfect setup for a movie. Phineas and Ferb interacting with Doofenshmirtz, them learning the truth about Perry. This movie essentially writes itself, although perhaps I shouldn't take that away from the writers, because this movie took advantage of everything it could. We get to explore a multiverse where Doofenshmirtz is a competent villain, but he doesn't have a good motivation like our version of Doofenshmirtz. What a funny idea. We get to see two different versions of every single character, but they still manage to bring the versions that we know from the show back in for the grand finale. The climax of the movie is just a celebration of everything that's happened on the show to this point. It's really a fantastic example of how to do a film adaptation. The songs are really catchy. It opens up with this Jackson 5 sounding song about Perry that's really catchy. The Doofenshmirtz villain song was really funny from both the lyrics and the great visuals they provided, coming up with a bunch of different pairs for them. I like that they got meta and threw in Phineas and Ferb themselves as one of them. I thought it was really funny that the scar went over the multiverse Doofenshmirtz eye patch, and then the song actually acknowledged that. Normally I would consider that over-explaining a joke, but the delivery is just so good that it still works. I think the end-in line of Doofenshmirtz treating their team up like a Friday night cartoon is my favorite joke in the entire movie.
What's that? Are we doing a TV show together? Oh, no, it just sort of sounded like...
Summer and Where Do We Begin is super catchy and memorable. Throwing in a Love Handle song at the end was a nice touch. This movie is just so full of charm and good jokes, and if you somehow have seen the show without watching the movie, I recommend it a ton. If I had to criticize anything about it, it really just comes down to how the movie got made rather than anything the movie did itself. It's a made-for-TV movie, and like I said in the last segment, sometimes that doesn't really hurt the quality of a movie too much. I think Ed, and Eddy's art style served the movie just fine, screen, but in Phineas and Ferb's case, I think a theatrical release would have done it some favors. The movie is still very impressive. They came up with a lot of new settings for this film, they played around a lot with CGI for the big climatic scene, they went as all out as they could, but isn't it kinda weird that even Phineas and Ferb couldn't hit the big screen considering how popular the show was? Isn't it too bad how low the demand for theatrical TV show films got? Like, I want you to really put it into perspective how common these movies were back then. Wild Thornberrys and Teacher's Pet both got a theatrical release. Hell, if you want to count the Rugrats crossover, Wild Thornberrys got it twice. Not dissing those two shows, I remember liking them as a kid, but I think Phineas and Ferb was a decent bit more popular than both of them. I mean, we're living in a time where even the most recent SpongeBob movie wasn't considered worth putting on the big screen. I don't know if that says more about theaters themselves dying or streaming taking over, but the lack of theatrical TV show movies was a thing well before the streaming wars started. I'm honestly kind of amazed that Bob's Burgers made it to theaters. And sadly, that one was not a hit. So it's not really looking good for these adaptations. I imagine most of them are going to go direct to streaming. The Phineas and Ferb movie is clearly trying to make itself look as cinematic as possible, even applying shade into certain scenes, but yeah, it's only certain scenes. Most of this movie matches the show's animation entirely. Is this super nitpicky? Yes. It's not like I'm docking a ton of points off for this movie for that. It's just part of a bigger issue, because if a show as popular and beloved as Phineas and Ferb can't make it onto the big screen, well, I'd say I'm worried about the future of TV show movies. But let's be honest, it's been the norm for a while. Breaking Bad is an insanely popular show. Direct-to-streaming movie. Invader Zim became an insanely popular show that people were begging for a revival for decades. Direct-to-streaming movie. I love this movie for what it is, and I think it can still be enjoyed greatly without the theatrical budget, but I do miss seeing that production upscale you would get from the film adaptations. I do think the spectacle is a fun part of it, but so few movies take that route these days, so you really just need to appreciate the ones that do. Speaking of which...
Teen Titans Go! To the movies!
I have seen very little of the show this one is based off of, but I don't think watching the show is that necessary for this movie. I'm sure there's some nice nods to people who have seen all the episodes, but just knowing what the show is and how different from the old Cartoon Network TV show it was, as well as how popular superhero movies and cinematic universes were at the time of this movie, and to some extent are still, will help you understand this movie just fine. It feels like both a meta-commentary on how people view the show, and a satire of not superhero movies as much as the film industry, poking fun of just how many of these movies were coming out. Showing trailers for an Alfred movie, or a movie about the fucking Batmobile. That isn't to say there is no commentary on comic books or the films themselves, but I may have another guest speaker on to talk about those in just a few. What I have seen of Teen Titans Go, I didn't really care for, and I do even have some connection to the old show. Granted, I never followed the story and just watched random episodes as they aired, but I never had a lot of hate for the show. I just didn't think it was funny. My little cousin would have it on when I was around him, and the show's sense of humor was just clearly not for me. I knew some people who hated it way more, and there were certainly a lot of videos on it from people who cover cartoons on their channels. Was the hate warranted? I can't say for sure. At the end of the day, it was clearly made for younger audiences, and it certainly struck a chord with them, probably being Cartoon Network's most popular show at the time. I mean, I'd argue it still is. Didn't they just release their 400th episode? Goddamn. I am happy to see another one of these movies actually hit the big screen. 2D animation alone is hard to come by with theatrical releases these days. Yet alone one that's based on a TV show, and I think for the most part it looks pretty good. Every character looks like they do on the show, but the animation budget is higher, which allows them to do more grand scenes of cooler backgrounds and interesting angles. I like the colors a lot, the movement is very smooth and it helps with the visual comedy a lot. They also try out a bunch of different art styles in this movie, and honestly I thought that was pretty neat too. I've seen animated films that will maybe do this for a scene, but Teen Titans Go does this a few times throughout its run, and I enjoyed those scenes a lot. The idea of them desperately wanting their own movie, but not being taken seriously by anyone, both works as something for these characters to be doing in a movie. I mean, you probably don't want to give Teen Titans Go a serious plot, but to me it also works as a meta-commentary for how the world sees Teen Titans Go. Obviously kids enjoy it, but the show has been criticized so harshly that the show has done several episodes responding to this criticism, often making fun of the people who speak out against their show. Some people would say that's them not taking criticism very well, but the show was a huge hit, and if someone talks shit, I do think you're allowed to talk shit back. So I think it's fair game. I still think the show is incredibly unfunny and people have the right to say that, but they can make fun of me for believing that if they want to. In the end, the movie sticks up for the show and its portrayal of the characters, kind of in a similar way the first SpongeBob movie did. It's okay to just want to make a silly cartoon for kids and embrace what made them stand out and become a popular show. I enjoyed seeing the characters briefly try to take themselves seriously and having a hard time doing so. This clip from the trailer is honestly what convinced me to check out the movie.
What are you gonna fart on me? We wanna have a dance-off? You gonna annoy me to death with your waffles?
I just love how self-aware the whole thing feels. Like, yeah, this is a movie for that Teen Titans. We are very aware how people feel about that Teen Titans. On top of some of the more meta humor that I do enjoy from this film, there is a lot of good visual gags too. My favorite one probably being when they're trying to take Batman out, and no matter what they do, he always has something else that he can charge at them with. That was a really good one. The film can have a very dark and cynical sense of humor at times. I know a lot of people have posted that clip of them killing Batman's parents. This movie does have some genuinely good laughs in it. I do remember Slade being a major villain in the old TV show, so it was cool for the movie to find a way to adapt him, and honestly, him being voiced by Will Arnett just had me imagine BoJack being Slade the entire time. Like his very sarcastic responses to everyone, but also his insecurities about being compared to Deadpool, just really reminded me of something that this character would say.
By the way, he should be saying that he's not me, okay? Because I came out, like, way before he did.
So I got a kick out of him too. Like I said, I'm not too big on the show, and while the movie did manage to actually be a relatively good comedy, I don't have much else to say about it. It's good, but it's not going to be at the top of the list or anything. If you love the show, I think this movie will do a lot for you. If you hate the show, you might still get a little something out of this movie. It does feel like its sense of humor is different from the show in a lot of ways, since it actually has something it's commented on. There is a point to it just outside of being haha lol random XD, but you are still going to get that very childish sense of humor in some scenes. Still, I enjoyed myself. Before I hand this one off to my guest, I will also point out that this movie has a really funny last joke. It's the last thing you see before it abruptly cuts to credits, and it was probably the funniest joke in the entire movie, so props for that.
Hey guys, I'm Olivia from Out of Ink, and I love comics, so I want to put in my 2 cents on Teen Titans Go to the Movies. Despite the show's controversy in the comic community for being too silly and childish, I would argue that Teen Titans Go to the Movies transcends its source material. The movie centers around Robin's quest to be taken seriously as a superhero, and he feels like the best way to get that validation is to get his own movie, a quest that lines up with the Teen Titans running into their greatest enemy, Slade, and the introduction of a new streaming satellite, which actually coincided with the real-world launch of HBO Max, or Max as it's now known. Kind of can't shake the irony of this movie's take on streaming, but hey, that's a whole separate can of worms. I am absolutely prepared to fight and die on the hill that Teen Titans Go to the Movies is a good comic book movie. It tells its story well, it's loaded with references without having that wink wink nudge nudge feeling, it calls back to the show without getting too obnoxious, and it has, in my opinion, one of the best Stan Lee cameos.
I'm back. I don't care if it's a DC movie. I love cameos.
Not now, Stan Lee!
However, I think the 2 best things about this movie are the Titans themselves and their chemistry with Slade. I love how much heart the Titans have, and that the movie sticks to its guns and keeps everyone a little silly, including having their version of Slade match the Titans' energy, because I don't think this movie could have survived with a serious Slade. In the original Teen Titans show, Slade is a menace, to put it lightly, and in the comics he's worse, so I'm glad that they put him on the Titans' wavelength instead of sacrificing the tone of this movie to capitalize on nostalgia for the original show's portrayal of this character. Anyways, I think this movie is a fun time at the very least. It looks great, it's funny, it has such good heart, and honestly, it's a great comic book movie with a lot of commentary on the state of comics without being too in your face. Thanks for listening, guys. Back into the void I go.
As I continue to do this series, I normally try to throw in at least one weaker movie in, just so we don't hit a point where every movie discussed is a piece of shit, because that's all we have left to talk about. It's why movies like Impractical Jokers or Drawn Together got covered so quickly. MacGruber is what I assumed would be the weak link of this episode, and shows what I know, this movie is hilarious. I think one of the film's greatest strengths is the build up to the joke. I've seen the superhero or secret agent who's actually really lame before, but normally the fake out of them seemingly being competent happens really fast. Like, they'll make them look really badass for like 30 seconds before having them trip on something or say something really stupid. MacGruber spends the first 20 minutes hyping this guy up as an action hero, only to have his mission go so incredibly wrong within a matter of seconds. And then this is how he deals with the misfortune.
Todd! You guys okay?
I will suck your fucking dick. I will do it. Just join my team.
Just tell me what you want me to fuck!
Okay, I don't have any lubricant. Do you see any whiteout?
What are you doing?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so fucked here.
From this point on, MacGruber is the most pathetic action hero who's ever lived, and it's hilarious. But they have more than just him fucking up the job. There's him fantasizing about reuniting with his wife, and then you see what's really happening. He's fucking her tombstone. Every aspect of this character's life is incredibly pathetic and terrible, and yet he continuously gets people back on his side. Kind of like he did in the SNL skits. Yeah, every MacGruber skit normally consisted of 3 segments that would get played throughout an episode. MacGruber constantly proving himself as a fuck-up, but still being selected for these missions in the next episode. Will Forte is the master at playing pathetic characters. I mean, no disrespect to this man, it is a role that he typecasted himself into, but he does it so much better than most people. He is just hilarious. Tandy from The Last Man on Earth, older Scott Pilgrim, even one-off characters like his one and I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I think I prefer Kristen Wiig as a more straightforward character than the really wacky and witty ones. I've seen her give a funny performance as the weirdo. I'll bring up Last Man on Earth again. She was funny on that, and she was playing a very crazy character there. But sometimes when she's playing a really wacky character on SNL, it just feels like something that would be better for a children's show. But when she has to give a really sarcastic or confused response to the lunatic, I normally get a laugh from her. So I enjoyed her in this quite a bit as well. Not that she isn't weird. She's definitely very weird in this movie, but I like the more calm Kristen Wiig, if that makes sense. In terms of how this movie works as an adaptation, well, it's interesting because on one hand, it has so little to adapt that it can kind of be whatever it wants to be. On the other hand, yeah, it has so little to adapt. Out of all of the movies I've covered for the show so far, this one is definitely the movie that had the least to work with in terms of the original source material. SNL even kind of poked fun of this a bit when the movie was getting released.
Come on, DeAndre. You have to admit it'd be pretty hard to turn your sketch into a full-length movie.
MacGruber's only 90 seconds.
But I actually think it ended up doing it some favors. Will Forte and Kristen Wiig's characters are funny, so expanding on them a bit with a well-directed action parody makes for a pretty enjoyable film. With that being said, the movie does manage to adapt the skit decently as well. The opener of the film has its own cover of the MacGruber theme that goes a lot harder than the brief one in the skit, which is something I'd say you would want out of a movie. And the climax of the movie does allow things to go back to the basics with an homage to the skits, and it's a pretty funny and welcome scene. If I had to nitpick, I would say I think the movie should have ended the way the skits do, with a bomb going off and the ending of the theme playing again. Maybe that was a little too predictable. I mean, I did fully expect them to do that, and that alone might be a good reason not to do it. But if they would have done that, they would have managed to adapt the beginning, middle, and ending of this skit, which I think would have been a nice touch. As it stands, though, it's a pretty good comedy. Out of all of the SNL skits to get adapted into a movie, MacGruber probably wouldn't be any SNL fans' #1 pick, but it's broad enough to where if you really put it into the right hands, something good could be made out of it, and that's exactly what happened. Jorma Taccone was both the director and a writer on this movie, and he's done some good work. He was a writer and played a pretty big role in the movie Hot Rod, which to this day is one of my favorite comedies ever made. Hell, while I mention that, I should also say he was a member of Lonely Island, and they had a lot of music videos I really loved when I was growing up. He also co-directed Popstar Never Stop Stoppin', which I've heard nothing but good things about. And hey, he was also in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, wow, look at him. It's always nice to get a chance to acknowledge the main subject of this channel in an off-topic video. MacGruber was not very well received by critics, but I certainly had a good time with it. It's my personal favorite for the live-action movies covered on the show so far, which I'll admit focuses way more on animation. I'll eventually try balancing this out a little better. The animated ones are just a lot more endearing to me. Anyways, before we move on, let's hear from another guest who has seen all of the SNL movies to this date.
Hey y'all, Matt here. So I've seen every Saturday Night Live movie, I did a whole ranking video on them, and let me just say MacGruber is easily the second best one behind Blues Brothers. Third if you're counting Office Space, which was based on an old Mike Judge cartoon that technically played on SNL, but it was just an acquisition. It wasn't an SNL original, and it actually played on a number of other programs, so I wouldn't count that one. But yeah, Office Space would be #1 on that list. Anyways, I figure Spiney's covered how good the movie is, and yeah, it's hilarious, but I'm here with a history lesson to tell you why it's so much better than most SNL movies. You see, they actually had an idea for this one. You see, in 1992, we got easily the third best SNL movie, Wayne's World, which was such a big hit. Lorne Michaels spent the rest of the 90s pumping out a bunch of movies based on other SNL sketches to mixed but overwhelmingly negative results. Because how the fuck are you supposed to make a movie about Stuart Smalley or the guys who headbanged a What Is Love? Luckily, this trend died with The Ladies' Man in the year 2000. So when Will Forte and the guy from Lonely Island that isn't Andy Samberg come back 10 years later with a MacGruber movie, you know it's because they actually had an idea for the movie and aren't just chasing a trend. Hell, basing a movie on a show that famously has a bunch of shitty movies might have hurt them in the long run. I know people love this one, but I think it's maybe a bit underrated or at least underseen. So if Spiny didn't convince you, allow me to co-sign. You should watch MacGruber. It's hilarious and it pulls off the look of the action movies it's trying to parody perfectly. That's all I got. I'll see you guys when Spiny covers It's Pat and I can talk about the glorious Charles Rocket. Or you know, Blues Brothers. I think I like that one more than Michael does. Anyways, thank you and good night.
Alright, it's time for everybody's favorite part. The Rankins, yay! The Drawn Together movie, the movie. Impractical Jokers, the movie. The Angry Video Game Nerd movie. Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie. I did not say the full title last time. Blue Mountain State, The Rise of Thadland. Pokemon, the first movie. Beavis and Butthead Do America. Teen Titans Go to the movies. El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. Regular Show, the movie. The Simpsons movie. The Bob's Burgers movie. Phineas and Ferb, the movie. Across the Second Dimension. MacGruber, The Venture Bros. Radiant is the Blood... What? Forget the full title, and the picture's too small to read. I'm looking at Letterboxd right now. The Venture Bros. Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart. Invader Zim, Enter the Florpus. Ed, and Eddy's Big Picture Show. Steven Universe the Movie. The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie. South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. I will say in all honesty, I do consider switching South Park and SpongeBob around a lot. I value very different things about both of those movies, so it really just comes down to what my mood is. Like, to me, South Park and SpongeBob are almost like both tied for first place with how much I enjoy them. But I'll keep South Park on the lead for now. If for nothing else, the very catchy songs.